Space Engineers 2? Wait, this is the wrong game. Space Engineers 2 is right around the corner, and Keen Software House has given me early access to show off some of its features. However, what I'm showing you today isn't actually in the game. I've been given early access to the Space Engineers 2 Pioneer Edition, which includes a bunch of behind the scenes secrets of the development of the game, including never seen before footage of the new volumetric water, our first look at planets and survival, and also the full in-game soundtrack. The Pioneer Edition is created for Space Engineers fans that want to provide extra support to the game's future development, and who also want to take a look at all the exciting things that are being worked on. So, whilst we'll be covering some of the secrets included, if you want to see absolutely everything in the Pioneer Edition, and trust me, there's some very juicy details in there will be a link in the description for you to do so. Additionally, more stuff will be added to it as the game develops, so there will always be more secrets to discover. Anyway, without further ado, let's take a look at it, starting with my favourite topic, volumetric water. So the first video showing off volumetric water is seen on screen here, and it's worth mentioning that whatever you see here isn't finished, and is potentially not the final version that will make its way into the game, so just keep that in mind throughout the rest of the video. So, the first thing that happens in this video is they open up the interface for this block, and we get to see a bunch of things on screen. Let's start with the bottom. We can see a water tank, very interesting. We'll see in a second that this is the block in front of us, and there's also 3 pumps, a basin pump, a lake pump, and then a second lake pump. Momentarily, they click on the lake pump number 1, and you can see it's got 3 options: absorb, release, stop, and then flow rate at the bottom. And then they click the absorb button, and you can see down here it says trying to absorb water. And then over here, they reduce the flow rate to 97, and then press release. And then we fly back up to the top, and oh my, they're pumping water out from the lake into this little box over here. It's real, volumetric water. They then go back down to the water tank, go to the pump, and then max it out, and you can see the water's flowing even faster now. You can see it looks a bit weird, as I said earlier, none of this is final, but even so, you can pump the water out of the lake and put it somewhere else. Oh, this is going to be so good. Look at it filling up this little box. Why is the clip end here? I want to see it fill up all the way. There's a second clip here. It features a little ship. The player flies in, gets in a cockpit, the ship flies up, lands just in the water, and then we get a clear look at the fact the ship has a tank and a pump on the outside of it. They then open up the control panel and you can see that the tank is filling up with water, and I'm pretty sure I know where this is going. They then fly the ship all the way up into space, outside of the planet's gravity, and then walk over to this incomplete block over here. This block is a pump, as you can see on the side here. Using their welder, they begin to weld up the pump, and then you can see it's complete, and then suddenly, water. Now when I first saw this, I thought, this looks a bit weird. It's not really flowing properly. And then I realized it looks weird because it's not flowing as I would expect, because this is water in 0 gravity. There's no gravity pulling it down. It will just expand out of the pump to fill the volume. And that's really cool. It's that dynamic that it's able to function in the 0G inside the ship. It's going to be a game changer. It's going to be a game changer. There's this footage here of a ship crash landing into water, and this is probably the best example of you seeing that the water isn't quite complete yet, as when they hit the water there's no splash effect, there's no ripples, the ship just goes straight through. So it would seem, at the time of recording this clip, those effects haven't been done, which would likely be one of the reasons that volumetric water isn't coming till later. But as you can see, the ship hits the water, and then it slowly floats back up to the surface. So things like buoyancy are already working, which means lots of things like boats are possible. I do wonder if you hit the water hard enough, if it's going to actually damage your ship, because stuff like that would be really interesting to see. Like you hit the water so hard, your ship like cracks in half. There's also these images here of an underwater base, and you can see inside the base there's no water, and obviously outside it's underwater, so there's water. And I'm going to say it, I'm pretty sure every single base I'm going to have from now on is going to be underwater. There's a lot of screenshots in the Pioneer Edition of things that have been built in Space Engineers 2, and one of the ones I wanted to draw your attention to is this image here. Now at first glance you're thinking, why are you showing us this? It's just a bunch of blocks. Well, this image is called AE Ruins A1. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the image again. You can see all these blocks placed around in the background. It kind of gives this, I don't want to say alien, as in outer space, but this kind of alien in the way that it's odd. It kind of reminds me of the oldest house in Control, where obviously this isn't going to be morphing, but the idea that this structure is kind of alive. And the fact that it's called Ruins, to me indicates that this is some sort of, ruin that spawns in the Amager system. There's also a second image with ruins in its name, and that's this one here. And once again, it has this kind of esoteric alien design, with the little blocks being on uniform like this. Now this appears to be a much older screenshot than the other one, but again, this screenshot is specifically named ruins. So what could this be? We were told during the announcement of Space Engineers 2 that there were secrets to uncover in the Almager system, that someone had been there before us. So potentially, these ruins are an example of that. I do love lore, so stuff like this really piques my interest, so I'm definitely interested to see what comes from this. In the same vein, there's this folder called Factions, and in it there's these two screenshots here, called Test 1 and Test 2. Now whilst Test 2 is just a dark corridor with some sort of green glowing block I don't recognise on the right, that's not the more interesting one of the two. It's this one, Test 2, that I'm more interested in, with this in the middle. This appears to be on display in the middle of the room, it's clearly spotlighted, and once again, it appears to be one of these ruins. This is how conspiracies start, guys. We've seen 3 different instances of these ruins now. There's a pattern here somewhere. I know it, I can see it. We also get a better look at one of these green glowing things, and maybe it's some sort of cargo container, or maybe it's some sort of like lying down cryopod. It's a bit of a weird shape, I'm not gonna lie. But regardless of what this block is and what this ruins thing is, why is this folder called Factions? I will say I found some additional details that might explain this mystery further and maybe start some new ones. But this video is focusing on the Pioneer Edition, so we'll save that for later. Like and subscribe if you want to see that. So I was just thinking, my throat feels a bit dry, I'm gonna go get a drink. And then I've realised I've been recording for 2 hours. I spent about an hour talking about water and blocks, so I'm probably going to have to cut a lot of that. And then I spent an additional hour talking about tools. So apparently I just have a lot to say about tools, I guess. But you probably don't want to watch me yap for that long, so let's compress it down. First of all, there's a couple of videos in the Pioneer Edition that show off destruction, but most importantly, in the bottom, we can see our 3 tools, the welder, the grinder, and drill. Those aren't in Space Engineers 2 currently because survival mode isn't in the game, and we haven't seen them in any pre-release footage, so this is pretty much the best look we've got at them so far. There's concept art that matches the designs of these 3 tools in the Pioneer Edition, which perhaps gives us some interesting insights of how they might be different in Space Engineers 2. For example, here you can see the concept art for the drill, and you can see here at the top, it is called the handheld plasma drill. Plasma drill. Huh. And what's even more interesting, there's a separate bit of concept art called Plasma Drill Engineer Functionality. You can see he's got the drill in his hand over here, and it shows it normal drilling on the right, and then below, the drill shoots out what I can only presume is plasma to excavate. Now of course this is concept art, we don't know if the in-game drill is a plasma drill, but it does look the same, so potentially. In Space Engineers 1, the technology is very purposely near future and not some crazy sci-fi stuff, so maybe in Space Engineers 2, our technology will be a little bit more advanced and lean more into sci-fi. In the concept art, the grinder is called the compact hand grinder, not too interesting, doesn't really reveal much. However, the hand welder is very interesting. First of all, it's called the handheld laser welder, which, you know, lasers are technically a real thing, but a handheld laser, especially one for welding up blocks, I don't know, and this looks very sci-fi in design. I also want to note this concept art here, which looks like a phaser. I would have picked this one, I love the phaser welder. There's also concept art for something called an Omni tool, and it appears the idea was that this Omni tool was all the tools in one, so it's a drill, a grinder, a welder, a mass manipulator, what? A voxel material dispenser, what? And also a painter, but that's not as interesting as the other 2. I'll let you in on a little secret. The Omni tool doesn't appear to have made it into the final game, mostly indicated by the fact that tools appear to be separate in Space Engineers 2, and also there's a long PDF included in the Pioneer Edition that says the Omni tool didn't make it past the concept phase. But I'm more interested in these 2 tools here. The mass manipulator appears in a couple of bits of concept art, like this one here, where you can see an engineer holding a mass manipulator and they're using it to move this block around. Now obviously this is concept art, probably very early, so this probably isn't representative of what the game will be like, but I do think it's interesting that early on they were considering this mass manipulator idea. There's actually a bunch of cool concept art for the spacesuit that details all the functions of the different parts of it, and a lot of the concept art seems to show off the ability to magnetically attach tools and weapons to the back. An interesting idea that didn't seem to make it to the final game, as those magnetic plates definitely aren't in the suit in the current game. However, there's 2 bits of suit concept art in particular I want to show you. This one shows a high radiation deep space engineer. Is this a skin, or is this perhaps something we might need? Is there going to be radiation in Space Engineers 2? It looks like early concept art and it doesn't match the designs of everything else, so I suggest it's probably not the case, but it is interesting. And there's also this design, which is called the Suit Design Heavy, which appears to have a larger backpack and the suit appears to have a much wider frame. So at some point during the concept phase of Space Engineers 2, it looks like they were considering different suits, potentially, or at least a different backpack in this case. Also, cable. There's lots of different bits of concept art for blocks in Space Engineers 2, and I don't want to bore you by showing you, oh look, this is a potential design for a refinery. I instead want to cherry pick some interesting ones, like this for example. This is referred to as an open conveyor, and you can see that the items go through here and that it uses gravity generators to push the items around. There's also this variation of the open conveyor, which is literally a conveyor at the bottom moving items around. There's another gravity one, this is called a gravity accelerator, which looks interesting. And then there's two more conveyor versions of it here. This one is variation D, this one is variation E. Now, we've seen conveyors in game, so presumably conveyors are going to look like they did in Space Engineers 1. So potentially the open conveyor could be some sort of new block, or potentially this is an idea they had and they decided against implementing it. I can imagine having all these items lying around on conveyor belts might be very laggy, and especially the gravity design where you shoot items around with gravity might be a little bit laggy. But even still, this is a really interesting design. This footage here shows them testing out placing down planes in Space Engineers 2. However, that's not actually what I'm interested in this footage. What's more interesting is later they grab a cockpit and you can see on the right the components it requires to be built. You can see it requires 6 steel plates, 11 glass, 20 electronic parts, 9 motors and 25 more steel plates. Now, we don't have a component called glass or electrical parts in Space Engineers, but we do have motors and steel plates, so potentially some components have been renamed, or potentially we're getting some new components. It becomes even more interesting later in this video when they switch over to placing atmospheric thrusters. We have heavy duty plates, turbine blades, combustion chamber, and compressor. What? Every single one of those components is new. It would appear that we're getting a number of new components in Space Engineers 2, and that would indicate to me that the progression of the game is getting reworked. And additionally, there's another even bigger example of this, but to see that, we need to take a look at planets. The Pioneer Edition shows off many images showing off the development of planets, so let's take a look at some of them, shall we? The first screenshot here shows us one of the new planets, Kemik. Kemik is very similar to the Mars-like planets in Space Engineers 1. However, as you can tell, despite the fact that the atmospheric effects aren't finished yet, this looks way better than Mars did in the first game. There's also this screenshot, which I'm pretty sure is on Kemik, although it's hard to tell. With the yellow filter, it could just be Mexico, we don't know. But it appears to have some basic structures placed down on the planet. And there's also this screenshot here, which could be Kemik, or the sun could be so low in the sky it makes this desert look like an orange planet. And I don't want to speculate too much, but what is this structure over here? Is it some sort of crashed ship? Is it some sort of alien ruin? I don't know. This screenshot appears to have been taken much more recently, so this is probably more representative of what the surface of Kemik will look like when Planets in Survival are released later this year. These glass domes seem to be a favourite at Keen as well, as there's lots of different screenshots of them. In this one you can see there's a lake behind, and there also appears to be two different kinds of tank here as well. This one here is the water tank we saw previously, so this one over here must be something else, hydrogen maybe? There's also screenshots of this base from a different angle, which I presume are here to show the difference of the lighting at different times, but it's kind of weird that there's no water behind, like it just vanished. Although, to be fair, this is what every single planet will look like after I've been to it. You know the meme of the guy that drinks the ocean? That's going to be my ship on every single server I'm on, don't you worry. Just look at the terrain over here, look how good it looks. This stuff is leagues better than what we currently have in Space Engineers. I am so excited for planets. Along with the screenshots of planets, there's also a lot that show off the water. You've probably seen this one before, of an aqueduct over a river, and considering what we saw earlier of them pumping the water, it would appear that potentially the aqueduct could actually be functional. And there's also this dam that's been shown off in many a teaser, and I've just noticed, and I can't believe I hadn't spotted this before, the water is higher on one side than the other. I know that's how a dam should work, but to see it's actually possible to manipulate and lower water this much is absolutely incredible. I am so excited. Just imagine the set piece of blowing a hole in this dam and someone's base gets flooded by the torrent of water coming through. It's gonna be so good. I've just noticed there's a second dam over here as well. Have they completely drained this area over here? There's water back here. Was this flooded before? Ooh. That's very interesting. I was going to talk about how much I like this screenshot. I thought this was the most picturesque screenshot with the water in the background. And then I've just spotted this snowman here. It just made me laugh. Oh, it looks so good. And also, icebergs. Is this an experiment or is this actually going to be a feature? It'll be very interesting to see. And I also look forward to all the Titanic recreations that'll be incoming as well. Whilst we're on the topic of planets, there's 3 bits of concept art I wanted to talk about regarding them. Number 1 is this concept art here. You can see there's 3 engineers and a big arm, but the main thing I want to draw your attention to is these 2 objects in the distance, which could potentially be moons, could potentially be suns. We've only been told about 3 planets in Space Engineers 2, Verdure, Chemic and Byblos, and whilst we've been told moons will exist in the new game, we don't know anything about them. Now obviously this is very early concept art, so this could mean nothing, but it is interesting that they're up there. And also, there's this. This, I would suggest, is a ring around the planet, and that's further supported by this concept art here, which shows a ringed planet in the distance. Again, concept art could mean nothing, or perhaps one of our planets has a ring around it. Moving on to the final piece of planetary concept art, there's this one here, and that's a black hole. Like, there's nothing else that can be. That's a black hole. Take of that what you will, but I don't think there'll be any black holes in Space Engineers 2. It's just one of the many interesting things in the concept art included in the Pioneer Edition. There's a folder in the Pioneer Edition that shows off lots of different materials for voxels, and initially I didn't think much of it. It's just a bunch of rocks at the end of the day, until I started to look at a certain subset of materials, more specifically, ores. There's cobalt ore, copper ore, which there's no copper ore in Space Engineers, gold ore, iron ore, lead ore, that's new, and it looks really nice. Nickel, magnesium, platinum, silicon, silver, titanium, that's new. I wonder what we're building out of titanium. And finally, uranium, which again is one we already have. Yeah, so I said it looks like progression is being reworked in Space Engineers 2. These new ores seem to be another big indication that this is the case. And I've also seen a couple of other things that indicate this might be the case as well, but that's not part of the Pioneer Edition, so we'll save that for later. The Pioneer Edition also includes the full Space Engineers soundtrack, and in a minute I'll be giving you an exclusive first listen of a track named Palatine. But before we do that, there's 3 quick things I want to mention. First of all, there's so much stuff in the Pioneer Edition I would have loved to talk about, but this video would be like 3 hours long then, and would probably end up releasing in July. So don't forget to purchase the Pioneer Edition if you want to see all the exciting behind the scenes secrets. Second of all, on the 27th of January at 6 PM UTC, there will be a Space Engineers release livestream, so don't forget to check that out and join in with the celebration. And third and finally, as I've mentioned, there's a bunch of other stuff I can't wait to talk about regarding Space Engineers 2, about lore, about new blocks, and a bunch of other things I found during my early access, so like this video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see that. And with that, this is Palatine from the Space Engineers soundtrack.